She screamed Bailey's name over and over again, but her calls went unanswered. Bailey is survived by her mother, Secret, her father, Jason, and her sister, Lily. Preston Ryan Cope was also 15 years old when his life was taken. Preston enjoyed spending time with his little brother, Maddox, who was 11 years old at the time of the shooting. They loved playing basketball and baseball together, as well as venturing out into the woods. Preston loved to be outside, preferring to be as active as possible. Preston's father said that Maddox looked up to Preston as an idol and his hero, and all his family say that Preston will always be remembered for his positive outlook on life. Unfortunately, there isn't much information known about Daniel or his background. What we do know is what was discussed during Daniel's interrogation with the police. At 8:22 a.m., Daniel was taken to the Marshall County Sheriff's Department and spoke with authority for about an hour and 54 minutes. One detective who spoke with Daniel described having worked as a police officer for over 18 years, and the interview with Daniel was one of the most bizarre interviews he had ever been involved with. The detective described that Daniel remained eerily calm as he discussed the rampage as casually as one would talk about the weather. Investigators started by reading Daniel his Miranda rights, and after being read his rights, Daniel agreed to answer their questions. He began by stating that he'd been thinking about the shooting for about a week prior, but the night before was when he made the final, deadly decision. Daniel contemplated the pros and cons of carrying out a school shooting and pondered what prison life would look like. He further explained to investigators how he went into his mom and stepfather's closet and retrieved the firearm from the shelf. Daniel stated he wanted to clarify. He didn't suffer bullying of any kind, and he never got into arguments with anyone that would have angered him. The troubled young man reported that he had a decent relationship with his parents and stepfather, but elaborated that the relationship with his biological father was quite rocky in the past, though it finally seemed to be improving recently. Investigators eventually asked the question everyone wanted to know. Why? Why did he decide to commit such a heinous act? Daniel couldn't give investigators a clear answer. He relayed that he was an atheist and that life had no purpose and no meaning, and that other people's lives had no meaning as well. Daniel felt that if he committed this shooting, he would be assisting in furthering society through science. He stated that the shooting was an experiment, and he wanted to see how students, police, and society would respond to the shooting, and see how people would react.
I was interested to see how things would happen, so I suppose in a way just out of curiosity of what would go on. How would people react? I've been curious about prison. You hear stuff, but you never know what it's really like.
When asked about the specifics of the shooting, Daniel explained that when he realized he didn't have any ammunition left, he wouldn't be able to defend himself against police without the gun. It was at this precise moment that Daniel realized he didn't want to die. If he had the weapon in his hand, the police might kill him. While Daniel was hiding with the other students, he remembered that he had the hunting knife in his satchel and thought about using it on the other students. But he knew he was caught and decided against it at the last moment. While talking about the actual shooting, Daniel asked investigators how many people he wounded and if anyone died. At this point, they showed Daniel a photo of one of his victims and asked him if Daniel knew who this person was. Daniel indicated he didn't and made no other response. He seemingly did not react to seeing his slain classmate at all. Daniel relayed that he had no specific person or target in mind when he committed the shooting. He just said that he, quote, started shooting.
Asked why, his response, I don't really know. I just kind of felt like it, I guess.
At one point, investigators asked Daniel if he was hungry. They were trying to keep him as comfortable as possible, attempting to keep him talking so they could conclude why Daniel would commit such an atrocious and unthinkable act. Ultimately, one of the detectives went to McDonald's and got him a cheeseburger and french fries, which he ate. After just under 2 hours of speaking with detectives, Daniel decided he wanted an attorney. At that point, all questioning was stopped.
Cold, callous. He never was emotional. His voice never quivered, never had any inflection. He didn't tear up. There was no snot. The things that you typically see, in fact, so much so, we showed a victim of one of the deceased. He looked at the picture and said, "I don't know her." And he had no response to that.
Daniel was lodged at a nearby juvenile detention hall and was given a $1.5 million bond. Initially, he was charged as a juvenile, with 2 counts of murder and 12 counts of first-degree assault. Since Daniel was charged as a juvenile, his name wasn't immediately released. A grand jury later indicted him on 2 murder charges and 14 first-degree assault charges. Prosecutors decided to charge Daniel as an adult. Many hearings and pretrial conferences coincided with the COVID-19 pandemic, thereby stalling the trial even further. The trial eventually commenced on June 1, 2020, but on April 28, 2020, Daniel agreed to plead guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, 8 counts of first-degree assault, Class B felonies, and 6 counts of second-degree assault, Class C felonies. The reduction in 6 of the assault counts is included as a part of the plea agreement in the case. On June 12, 2020, many of the victims addressed Daniel, telling him exactly how the shooting had affected them. The families of Bailey Holt and Preston Cope also spoke to the court and let everyone know how much their lives had changed since January 23, 2018. Daniel, who was now 18 years old, had nothing to say to the court. No apology, no explanation, nothing. He was let out of the courtroom in handcuffs, where he would be taken to prison to spend the remainder of his life. In the fall of 2018, mere months after the shooting, the Marshall County High School marshals took to the football field for the season's first game. Devin Evans, Dalton Keeling, and Gage Smock all suffered gunshot wounds to the jaw, back, or chest. Dalton was shot in the chest. The bullet exited through his back and shattered multiple ribs. A bullet entered Gage Smock's face and exited on the other side, breaking his jaw into numerous pieces. He was airlifted to Vanderbilt University Medical Center, where his jaw had to be reconstructed and wired shut for 6 weeks. On the night of their first football game of the season, the players gathered in a locker room and paid their respects to their 2 fallen classmates and all the other students who were injured that day in January. It was also decided that they would be playing for Bailey and Preston that season. That year, it wasn't about playoffs or championships. It was about playing for a purpose. This shooting wasn't just another school shooting, it was cold-blooded murder. For the police, paramedics, and even Judge Jamie Jameson, who presided over the case, this was personal. You see, many of the personnel who responded to the school that day had children, grandchildren, nieces, and nephews who attended Marshall County High School. One of the police officers that arrived first received word that his daughter was one of the victims that had lost their lives, and a short time later, he received word that his daughter was safe and out of harm's way.
One of our first troopers to arrive on the scene saw the young lady that died there on the scene and thought it was his daughter, because she had been dropped off at the school this morning as well. Same clothing description, same description. And he had to go over to convince himself that that was not his daughter.
Judge Jamie Jamison, a graduate of Marshall County High School, spoke through tears. He told Daniel, quote, "I don't know how you get to the point where you discount the value of life down to the equivalent of a computer game, where perhaps you thought you could hit the reset button and undo all of this. Or the other option is you just really, truly are a cold-blooded murderer." We usually end each episode with, "If you see something, then say something." For today's episode, we'll leave you with the words of Judge Jamison and gently remind listeners that life isn't a computer game. There is no reset button. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Active Shooter, the podcast. Remember, if you see something, say something. There's no telling how many lives you may be saving. A huge thank you to Darren Curtis, who composed some of the music used in this episode. Check him out at darrencurtismusic.com. DARRENCURTIS music.com.
Active shooter. Reports of an active shooter. Active shooter.
Active shooter. Mass casualty incidents.
Make sure to check us out on social media. We have a discussion group on Facebook. Just search for Active Shooter, the podcast discussion group. You can also find us on Instagram at Active the Podcast and Twitter at Podcast Active. For just $1 a month, you can get access to ad-free episodes, early release episodes when available, and a shout-out on the show. Just go to patreon.com/Active the Podcast. Thank you, and be safe.
Hi, my name is Jules, and I'm the host of Riddle Me That True Crime, which focuses on unsolved murders and disappearances, where I often do so with the help of family members, where they come on and tell their stories, and oftentimes with experts. I'll usually present the story over a multi-episode story arc. Sometimes I'll do one-off episodes like one I covered recently, which was the tragic and very suspicious death of 14-year-old Noah Donahoe in Belfast, Northern Ireland. So Noah went off on his bike one day. It was Father's Day, the 21st of June, 2020, amidst lockdown. He rides his bike and he's going to Cave Hill Park to meet friends, and something along the route causes him to get derailed. He ends up in an area that he's unfamiliar with and has no business being in, given that he's a Catholic schoolboy and this is a loyalist area. So it takes just under a week until Noah's body is discovered. He's discovered unclothed in a storm drain, and the PSNI comes out with a preliminary conclusion of accident. Mind you, this is before an autopsy has been done to determine manner of death or cause of death, and also before the forensics has been run. The family is screaming out for justice. I really hope you will join me on Riddle Me That True Crime, which you can listen to anywhere you get your podcasts.